Welcome to the Genius Talk podcast. I'm your host Atul Raj from the bestemailmarketer.com, and today we have Philippa Games with us. Philippa, thank you so much for joining and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Okay, so for our listeners who don't know you, can you tell them who you are and what do you do?
So I call myself a web intelligence strategist, but what I'm really trying to do is to explain to business owners why your web analytics is so important and why you're really flying blind if you're not looking at them, because you really don't know what's going on with your website. There are so many insights that you can't tell just by looking at it from the outside. But my message is at the same time that doesn't mean that you, the business owner, have to do the analytics analysis kind of thing yourself. But it is really important that you are able to talk to somebody who might look at them for you about your business and about your strategies and about what you're really trying to do. Because otherwise, you look at them and it's just a sort of massive numbers and it's very, very difficult to get into it and get those meaningful insights without knowing what you're looking for in order to achieve the exact result that you want.
So, how do you first get into digital marketing and analysis?
How did I get into it?
Yeah.
I just thought it was fascinating, because in the days before digital marketing, if you think about it, or even now, if you think about other media, so like if you have a newspaper or a magazine, for example, they can tell you how many copies they sold or, how many subscriptions they've sold or whatever, but they can't tell you how many people read each page or which pages they read. Right. They can't tell you how many individuals might have picked up the same magazine. Whereas we can do all of that with digital analytics. And we can get quite granular about what people do, like exactly how much of a video do they watch? Or how much of a podcast do they actually listen to? How many of your listeners actually listen to the first 10 seconds and go, oh no, I think, not that one. And they're gone. Hopefully very few in this case, but it happens. And now we can actually tell that. So we can start saying, okay, the way I'm starting the video or the podcast or whatever isn't compelling. So I need to change it. So, we can actually take action on what happens.
So, what does a website that wins mean to you?
So that's the name of my company, Websites That Win International. And I like to think of winning as winning in a number of different ways. So obviously winning financially, but also, there's a phrase like having something like a winning smile. So they're attractive, right? They emotionally connect with the visitors that come to them. They understand why people come and how to engage them. So, it's winning in lots of different ways, and it's more than just what the money does.
Okay, so what's the biggest mistake you see on most websites?
Actually, that's an interesting question. There are a couple of things that are going on now that are really, I think, problems. One is something that I'm noticing where websites tend to have quite long pages now because of mobile phones, which means that design-wise, instead of making people click to a new page, it's much easier to swipe up. But especially when you see that on a desktop version of the website, now we can measure how far down people actually scroll. And a lot of times I see that people don't scroll that far. And that means that if you've got really important information further down the page, then a significant number of your visitors aren't going to see it. And if that's really important information, then obviously that means that potentially you're losing business and you're losing, the results of people seeing that content. So as when I say flying blind, I really mean that. It's important to know what of your significant content that you really need people to see, how many people actually do see it. The other thing that I see that's really an issue right now, well, always has been actually, ever since I've been working on it, is the lack of calls to action. So the call to action means tell me what to do next, right? Point me to what you want me to do, because if you don't, people will figure it out for themselves, but they won't, or they might not try, or they might, or they might do something completely unexpected that was totally different than what you thought they would do. But unless you direct people very firmly to what you want them to do next, you can't rely on them to do that. And for example, just yesterday I was looking at a client's analytics, and so she's in the United States, and in the United States, they just had a holiday called Martin Luther King Day, which is obviously about civil rights and so forth.
Mhm.
And she's a leadership coach, executive coach. She had a blog post that she actually wrote several years ago, around observations on Martin Luther King Day and applying it to leadership. And I was noticing this in the analytics, a load of traffic from Google search. So she wasn't proactively promoting it, right?
Mhm.
But she
Mhm.
got several hundred visitors, which is quite significant for a small business, who came to that blog page because they found it in Google. And that blog, which this is very typical for a blog posting, had no calls to action. I mean, it was like, this is interesting, read this, which they did. And then there's nothing else to do. And a lot of time on blog sites, especially, there's not a lot of navigation back to the rest of the site and hello, this is who I am. This is what I do. And you can see people just leaving, and that's
Mhm.
several hundred people. So that's kind of what I mean. It's important to, at the bottom or in the middle or somewhere or all the way through it, be saying, if you think this is interesting, then how can we engage further, and sort of point them to other things that you offer.
Okay, so you have reviewed over 5,000 plus sites. So what pattern do you see over and over again of the like website that are performing really good?
They perform really well.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, so obviously the reverse of what I've just been saying, so
yeah.
sites that are really clear, and I don't mean a funnel necessarily. Like, I'm not trying to say, a one-page thing that doesn't give you any exit points. But I think you have to look at how you're engaging visitors. So, because a lot of times, we focus on the things that are obvious to the business to focus on, like, how do I get traffic to my website, especially if I'm paying it? And then, what are the results? How many leads do I get? How many sales do I get? But we forget the piece in the middle,
Mhm.
which is that engagement piece. Like, how do people find out more about us? How do they decide if they can trust us? How do they decide if we really do what we say we do? And ultimately, of course, that they want to do business with us. And all of that is really important, because very few people, come to a website and just say, right, this is it, I'm ready to buy immediately, especially obviously if they don't know you. So, a really good about us page is actually quite important, because people do check those out. And if you have a business, it's, people still do business with people. So it's quite important to have photographs, actually who works at your company, who are the actual people, because
Mhm.
there's a load of about us pages that are just completely anonymous. It might say our company's
Mhm.
been around for 25 years, but you have no idea who runs it, who's there. And it's amazing how these little things kind of help. I've got stories. I wrote a book about 12 years. I mean, I have a new book now, but I wrote a book a while ago. And I was talking about, in some cases, how if somebody's on the phone and they're really, or complaining and they're really annoyed with
Mhm.
you, but even if they
Mhm.
can see a picture of the person that they're talking to, it kind of helps that relationship in terms of making things smoother. So some of this is kind of translated old style customer service that translates into the digital world. Right. So
Mhm.
relationships still matter. So I think that's what websites that do well really understand why people come to that business, and speak to that, and speak to the people that come to them.
Okay, so what are the first three metrics any business should check in their analysis?
So that's quite a question I get asked quite a bit. And honestly, I don't know if you've already kind of worked this out from what I'm saying. I don't believe that there are necessarily three metrics I don't believe in one size fits all answers, because I really believe that it matters what you want to achieve. So, for example, if you already know that there's something that you're not sure is working on your site that's important, then obviously you would want to check that.
Mhm.
So you can't measure everything. So it's really important to decide on some priorities. So maybe right now you decided to have a social media advertising campaign, right? How is it paying
Mhm.
off? But think about, because there's no point in measuring stuff unless you know what you're going to do with it. So you find a metric that looks off. You want to think about, okay, so what do we need to change to make this better? But then you're going to have to test that. So it's really much better to look at your own business, decide what's going on, decide on a few metrics that you want to be looking at right now that you can actually do something about, that are going to make a difference. rather than trying to measure absolutely everything. And those priority metrics, of course, can and will change as you resolve things that you're looking at.
Can you share any of your client's success story that you are really proud of?
Yeah. One of the things that I love about doing analytics is that, okay, so we can find out what's going wrong, and we can find out where we're losing revenue, and we can find out where, people aren't seeing any content because the page is way too long and all of that good stuff. Right. And once we've done all that, the thing that I really enjoy is when we can start getting creative. Right. So finding
Yeah.
new opportunities for products or services or target markets. So, for example, I was working with a client that made industrial wax. So all sorts of different wax for business use. Right. So they sold it at an industrial level. But the waxes that they made included things like beeswax and maybe duck wax and so on. And they were doing quite well in search. And we discovered, I mean, it was pretty clear from what we could see people were doing and when they contacted the business, that they were attracting actually quite a few consumers, individual consumers to the site because they were looking for high quality beeswax to make their own candles. Now, obviously they weren't potential customers for an industrial wax manufacturer, right? But there were a lot of them. And we said, well, maybe there's an opportunity here because the SEO is working. They're coming to the site. They're not paying for that traffic. It's just arriving. So they actually created a little small side e-commerce business that was separate from the main site. And it basically sort of said, look, we're a B2B site, but if you're a consumer looking for good wax, click here kind of thing. And there was, so so that small side business was selling, small amounts of beeswax or whatever to people who wanted to make candles because the traffic was already coming. And it didn't take much staff effort and it did very well. And, so it was interesting just because we saw all these people coming who weren't the target customers for the business. But there were enough of them that we could say, is it worth looking at some way to capitalize on this? And in my book, I have a new book called Website Wealth, A Business Leader's Guide to Driving Real Value from Your Analytics. And that story's in there. And there are various other stories of sort of similarly, how do you look at the visitors that maybe not about to buy your core products, but maybe you can create something else that they would buy and just make some additional revenue.
Okay, so your book, like when it's coming out?
It is out. It came out last summer.
Last summer, okay. Okay, so the new book you're talking about, like that have been launched.
I wrote a book about 10 or 12 years ago, and I've just written a new book. Yeah.
Okay. And for our listeners who want to go and read your book, where can they go?
It's at all good bookstores, actually, including obviously Amazon, but it's also, you can get it in an actual bookstore. So if you go to my LinkedIn, for example, you'll see a link there's a universal book link that tells you exactly where you can get it. But of course, you can get it on Kindle and as well.
Okay, so for our listeners who want to know more about you or want to get some help from you, where can they go?
And so my favorite place to talk to people is on LinkedIn. I'm still working on my website like everybody else, but I think I'm the only person in the world with my name. So if you look me up on LinkedIn, you'll certainly find me. And on LinkedIn, actually, I also have an offer. I do a thing called an outside-in leak check. So this is a free 15-minute call where I'll take a look at your website with you and just tell you, without even looking at your analytics, just based on my experience, some key places where you may be losing traffic, revenue, and opportunities. And then obviously, if you want to look at that in more detail, then we can talk about doing that.
Okay, so is there anything else that you would like to share?
Is there anything else I'd like to say? Yeah, I mean, honestly, for anybody listening, seriously, if you're not looking at your analytics with a really clear idea of what you're trying to do, you could be missing out on some really good opportunities, and you could be losing revenue, or you could be seriously wasting money on doing things that aren't working for you. So it's not that difficult to get started. Google Analytics, for example, is free. You can get people to help you. You can read my book and get a lot of good ideas, but try to find a way to get started. As I said, my philosophy is if you're the business owner, you don't have to do it yourself. But you have to understand your business so you can tell people like me what it is you really want to do.
Great, Philippa. Thank you so much for spending some time with us. And it was really great chatting with you.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.